Thank you for joining us on Channel's Book Club. I am Olakunle Kasumo. Today on the show, we have a guest who seems soaked in by the passion to tell stories. Nigerian writer Campbell-Fatoki was born in Ukraine, but spent her formative years in Lagos, Nigeria, listening to stories and folk tales told by her maternal grandparents. Nike holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in Economics from Howard University and a Master of Arts degree in International Development from American University, Washington, D.C., where she is currently a budget and finance manager. But telling stories has become her second nature. She authored a historical fiction novel titled Thread of Gold Beads, which made the Channel's Book Club Top 15 Books for 2013 list. The novel was adapted to a stage play in 2014 and has been translated into French. Nike's latest book is one that is getting rave reviews. It's titled Bury Me Come Sunday Afternoon. It's an interesting and sometimes hilarious collection of short stories that describe everyday social happenings that many Nigerians at home and abroad have become familiar with. Recently, just before hosting a book reading event at Quintessence Ikoyi, Lagos, I had a chat with her to review her book, Bury Me Come Sunday Afternoon, and discuss a few things related. Nike, nice to have you on the Channel's Book Club again.
Thank you so much for having me again.
And congrats on your new book.
Thank you.
Now, Bury Me Come Sunday Afternoon. Why did you pick that title?
Because I knew it would captivate the audience and anyone who heard it, so that's why I picked it. And it's one of the stories in the
yes,
in the
sure.
book.
It's now, your first book was a historical fiction novel.
Yes.
This is a book of short stories.
Correct.
Why did you decide to write short stories this time around?
Well, you know, I wrote Thread of Gold Beads in 2012. It's been 4 years. And I didn't want to be labeled as a historical fiction writer. I can do so much more. So I challenged myself to write something contemporary. And not just something contemporary. I wanted to speak to the societal issues of our time. So as I had finished Thread of Gold Beads, I knew I wanted to write something that would speak to these issues. So I knew that was the next thing I was going to do.
But you could have written a novel, something different from historical fiction, another type of novel.
Well, the issues we face are so many, a lot of them, and I didn't think a novel could do justice to that. Right? Okay. It might be too cumbersome for a novel, so I wanted to pick short stories to bring the stories and the issues home to people quickly in a very impactful way. So that's why I picked short stories.
That was my impression when I read it. I felt like you had a lot of things buzzing in your head. Mm-hmm. So you wrote different stories to address those different issues. But one thing seemed to run through most of them, I wouldn't say all, diaspora. Is that correct?
For the most part, yes.
Yeah, because there's always a story of somebody living overseas, a Nigerian living overseas, what's life like for him or her there, or some Nigerians in Nigeria who used to live overseas.
Yes.
Something like that. There was a lot of that in your stories.
Yes.
Was that deliberate?
That was just natural.
Okay.
Having lived overseas for a while, I wanted to, when I write, I kind of want to write from experiences that I've gone through myself. So it's more natural for me, and I wanted my writing to be natural. So it kind of like just stemmed from that. It just came out like that way, I guess. You know,
I get curious when I read. When I read a book, I try to get into the mind of the writer. You know, try and know a bit more about the writer every time I read. That's the way my mind works. Now, are you somebody with a lot of sense of humor? There's a lot of humor in your book.
Yeah.
Do you when you want to sit down to write, do you create humor in telling your stories, or does it just come naturally to you? Because some of these stories here, I found them very funny.
Very funny.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm like everybody else. I like when you laugh, you are at ease, and I find when I'm at ease, I'm able to soak in more of my environment, of the people, of the atmosphere. So I guess I wanted to create that as I was writing it, I was actually laughing when I was writing. I was like, oh my God, people are going to get a kick out of this. And I guess they've gotten a kick out of so many characters in the book. And I kind of like, yeah, at home, I'm the funny one. I like to crack jokes. I like to play pranks on my boys. They're like, Mama, stop. And that's when I get even worse. So I guess I like that as well. I like humor a lot.
Then I'm also guessing that once you've created a particular character, it takes up a life of its own, sort of.
Of course.
I mean, if you decide that a particular character is supposed to be funny, you know, I'm guessing, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, as you write, as you tell the story of that character, it just takes up a life of its own. Yeah. Is that true?
Yes, it takes up a life in your head. I mean, the character is in your head. And for the time period you're writing, you're thinking about, if I was this character, what would I do? They become part of you, another personality that you actually own, that's yours, and you know, you eat them, you breathe them, it's everything. They're human like you and me. So any writer, they understand. I'm sure you do as well. So that's exactly what it is. Yeah.
That's the power of a writer, really. I mean, to sit down, create a character, and one of the things that amazes me about writing really is how you then keep consistency with regards to the story of a particular character. You have all these characters you've written about, you've created. Now, throughout a story, they all have to be consistent. Do you find that tricky as a writer?
Quite.
A lot.
It's tricky, especially I like to do one thing at one time. So I like to stick to one story at some point. But sometimes you get like caught up, like, okay, I'm stuck on this story. You might have to move to another story, and then you have to come back to the first story. So you have to kind of like keep in mind, this character is this way, this way. Don't go to the next character. Stay in your lane. So it's a little tricky, but you get a hang of it.
Yeah. And then if a character is tall, you have to keep him tall.
Yes.
Throughout the story.
Exactly.
I mean, that's fascinating. Now, what dictated the stories you picked for this book?
As I mentioned earlier, I wanted to speak to societal issues of our time. So I kind of like sat down when I wanted to start writing the stories. What are the issues that we face that is going on right now everywhere? I spoke about domestic violence. Child sexual abuse was another one of them. Child marriage was another one of them. Immigration issues was another one of them. And so I crafted the stories around these many issues. And it was easy when I was able to identify these issues and then
start created the stories around the issues. So you picked the issues first, and then the stories came later. Interesting. Because some of those stories got me thinking. For example, Last Will and Testament, where this man had 3 children, and then he wrote a will, which they got to learn about after he died. And then he gave only one of them a few houses, and then gave the rest of everything he had to another daughter he had. Now, that story, I found it interesting because I've always thought about what goes through the minds of people who live, very successful people or wealthy people who leave a lot for their children, and then you find a lot of those children fighting, bickering over. So that had always been at the back of my mind. I think that caught my attention when I was reading this particular story. Why did you write that particular story?
Because of recent, you know, a lot of people that I know of have been passing away. And of course, I've heard a lot of things going on with wills and things of that nature, and siblings going at it. They say one thing really can drive a family apart, and that's money. When someone dies, that's when you see the real faces of people come out. And I've observed this, and it's really saddening for me, where families just are torn apart by these things, that at the end of the day, you're not carrying any of these things to heaven. So why don't you come together as a family and try and, you know, talk about these issues, and you don't find a good solution to them? But that never happens. So I wanted to speak to that as well. And I also wanted to speak to the things that happen in families that are never spoken about. And at the end of the story, you know, something comes out that is unbelievable, that even Pa Karimu was able to tell in his will and testament, this is my secret, and this is what I haven't told you so many years ago, and that comes out in public. So it's me speaking also to the fact that what's done in secret will eventually come out in the open.